One question with regard to the $96 million of Prop 2 funds. That's designed so it has to specifically augment the university's contribution. It cannot supplant it.
Yes, this is specifically related to the past liabilities that have built up at the UC.
But just to be clear, any UC general fund monies that would have been used to address those liabilities could not be redirected otherwise?
That's my understanding. I would need to get back to you on the very specifics. Obviously, this is one-time monies. These are monies being used to specifically pay down past obligations. They are not set aside to pay down UC's current obligations, which are annual and ongoing. This is merely to pay down additional debt because it's from the Proposition 2
there are restrictions
bucket,
on how
so it's
those
very
dollars
clearly
can be used.
for debt. And so that is important.
So,
I think it's really a matter of a budgetary, internal budgetary matter, how much they were going to be paying down for that debt in their overall budget. I don't have all of that information.
And maybe just to declare, as a condition of the agreement, UC currently makes an employer contribution of 14% of payroll. They will continue to make that contribution moving
this is
forward.
going back to the years when there was no contribution.
Yes, so it's risen over time, and they would continue to make that employer contribution.
So I'm just thinking from a legal perspective, how do we make sure that the dictates of Prop 2 are not violated in any way, unintentionally or unintentionally?
And I think we would look into that.
Yeah, I think that it's absolutely is for debt, and so I think that's something that everyone at the table is in agreement about, so that UC and the administration. So that is there's not a lot of transparency about all of the different components in the UC's budget, but this is an agreement, a condition of the money being provided, that it be used only for this purpose.
Got it. But again, I'm not suspicious in any way. I'm just concerned that we don't get, we the state, caught in using Prop 2, half of our Prop 2 inappropriately, in that if there's not specific language, if they were going to make, let's say, a $50 or $100 million pay down on that liability, and now this is happening, maybe then that money gets redirected for operations. We'll
get back to you with more specific safeguards that we believe in place, are in place or should be put in place, but it clearly is for debt.
I understand that that's certainly the intent. Okay.
Now, one of the concerns we had, of course, is that the enrollment is set for the fall. And, that's done. It's a done deal, as most campuses. So the question is, if we fund it now, is one of the conditions is that we have an increase in enrollment of California students, and they're already funded. If they don't reach those goals in the coming year, then we've already funded something that we're not going to get back. I know there's some discussion of delaying funding into the fall, until December, January, October, to ensure that those targets are met, that effort and outreach is done, because we're funding a hope of increased enrollment the University of California, and if it doesn't materialize, then we're left holding the bag in terms of not getting what we had agreed to. So is there any thought on that from the governor's perspective and his recommendation for funding?
So we don't have any specific money earmarked for additional enrollment in our UC proposal. That's not true. In our CSU proposal, there's an expectation that CSU will increase their enrollment in the spring semester, because, as you said, the fall is really determined at this point. So your question is about holding money back and to ensure targets. That is not part of our proposal. So
the governor's proposal has no targets for enrollment? Increased in local enrollment, residential enrollment?
No increased enrollment targets, but a lot of actions that my colleague outlined that are all targeted towards reducing time to degree, increasing the efficiency. And I wanted to go back to the AP course discussion, and I understand and I hear your issue on that. But actually, what we're working on with UC is specifically to allow those students who did take AP courses, because they were offered, to actually bypass some of the courses that they would otherwise have to be placed in, therefore freeing up that spot for additional enrollment into the university.
And I
so,
assume the assumption is as if they pass the AP course.
yeah, they have to pass some sort of standardized exam. I think that's really what we're trying to work through with them. Many other private nonprofit colleges have more streamlined ability to move students through in 3 years. This is not for all students, but those students that do come with significant AP coursework, they can be moved out of some of those freshman courses, and that makes space for other freshmen to be admitted.
Okay.
Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do I understand correctly that in none of the proposals is there anything that would say that there would be a cap on non-resident students? Is that correct?
No, in the assembly proposal and the handout that we just provided, the assembly proposal is assuming that we're requiring that UC hold non-resident enrollment flat from 2015-16 levels into 2016-17. So they could increase in 2015-16, but not
So
in
it's for 1 year.
And that's just in the assembly
And the
proposal.
Senate proposal does not?
The Senate proposal
suggest
doesn't include
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
Senator Nielsen.
Well, I don't take comfort in that. You know, the UC particularly is wanting to be able to move tuition up for a longer period of time. And I think we have a right to have a greater expectation of in-resident, in-state enrollments. When's the last time that the master plan was ever met by CSU or UC? Can anybody tell me when the last time that those targets were met, 12.5%?
We're going to talk about this issue in a couple of items from now regarding an eligibility study to determine if UC and CSU are meeting the master plan targets. So you might want to wait until that.
That there's got to be a quid pro quo here. And if we're going to give some abilities for UC, say, to raise money, then we're going to exact price. That price is going to be California students. Enrollments are going to be increased. And I feel very strongly about that in terms of this budget is concerning. And so we'll have maybe the targets, but I'm not just talking about targets. I'm talking about commitments and agreements and enforceable mechanisms to ensure that California student enrollment does absolutely go up at CSU and UC. Not just some vague language that that's a goal. We want to see it happen. And I like Assemblymember Weber's, let's withhold. Maybe it's time to use a little bit of a log up beside the head to get somebody's attention. It obviously has not been working thus far. Yeah.
Assemblyman Bloom.
Well, I'll take a slightly more positive note. I'm frankly pleased that the Assembly's proposal does provide for an increase in California enrollment of 8,000 California residents, and I think that's a big deal. I did want to observe that the discussion of the University of California funding started many, many months ago, and it started in a state of a good deal of acrimony. And I'm very pleased that we're at a place now where we're really forging agreements and getting to a place where we're discussing the fundamental issues and working things out in a much less conflict-laden manner. So I wanted to just take a moment to congratulate everybody on taking a step back and thinking about what the core issues are here and what all of our missions are which I think do, frankly, coalesce. I know all of the players who have engaged on this issue. I think we all do. And I think everybody comes from a good place, and sometimes things take on a tenor that is unfortunate, and that was where things were headed with this discussion many months ago. So I'm very pleased that we're in a better place today. I think that I'm hoping that things will continue to improve and that these proposals will continue to improve. But I'm very pleased that we, on the Assembly side, are providing a significant, proposing a significant bump in funding beyond the governor's proposal, but tying that to some performance measures that are critical, including the capping of out-of-state students and the increase in local California students.
All right, moving on to the California Dream Loan Program, page 33. Senate has a proposal. LAO. I think so.
So last year, the state created the Dream Loan Program. The program allows AB 540 students, who typically are undocumented students, at participating UC and CSU campuses to obtain loans to finance their education. These students typically are not eligible to receive federal loans. The enacting statute stated legislative intent to fund the program in the Annual Budget Act. The program's designed as a 50-50 match between the state and participating UC and CSU campuses. The Senate plan includes funding for the program of $5 million. $2.5 million would be for UC and $2.5 million for CSU. Given that the legislature, that the state created this program last year and intended to fund it, and that the amount of funding in the Senate plan is in line with the levels of funding identified by the appropriations committees last year, we recommend the Senate version.
Thank you, Mr. Golozewski. Senator Lara.
Thank you. Let me start with some honey first. Say that you have a lovely lavender blouse. You know, California has been a leader nationally when it comes to supporting undocumented students, with support, quite frankly, from both parties since 2001. And, you know, as we talk about strategies of how to graduate students quicker, we have spent millions of dollars in the state budget funding programs, funding innovation studies. And this is one very modest approach to actually get to the program of helping students graduate quicker and providing more slots for more students. We know that at a minimum, undocumented students still have a gap in their financial aid packages of over $6,000 for UC and $3,000 for the CSU that other students with similar financial circumstances don't have. And you know, we know that the majority of these students are going to obtain deferred action, which is we call DACA, and will eventually gain citizenship. And so again, this is a what I think is a very modest approach. The UC and the CSU have committed to pony up their side of the resources to make sure that this program begins to work. And I want to thank the administration, the governor, for not only supporting this bill, but always being a champion for our undocumented student population. So I think, again, where we have been funding programs and continuous studies of how to increase graduation rates and have spent millions of dollars in previous budgets, this is a very modest approach to getting at a critical problem, which is allowing these students to take out loans, being able to repay them back in a revolving fund so that they can graduate, get to work, and become productive members of our society.
Thank you, Senator. And Ms. Bosler, I'm sure you have a comment.
Just that we do support the policy and as you know, and since the bill was signed this last fall, Just that our approach is that the significant the base resources that are being allocated to both UC and CSU could be used to support this program, along with both UC and CSU have significant institutional aid already, and so I think small adjustments can be made to accommodate this changed policy that we do think is an important policy to continue to pursue.
You still think it's beautiful lavender?
It's great. Looks great from here.
Thought it was periwinkle myself, but we'll leave that for another day. 34, marine mammal stranding networks.
The Assembly included $1 million that would go to UC Davis Wildlife Health Center. The campus would use this funding to administer grants to private organizations in a network that provide care for malnourished sea lion pups that have been showing up on shore. The organizations that perform this work are reporting a substantial increase in the number of sea lion pups showing up on shore this year. They provide them with medical treatment with the goal of releasing them back into the wild. This would be a new state program. The state doesn't currently provide funding for this purpose. The organizations generate most of their revenues currently from donations, private donations.
Thank you. Councilwoman Bloom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're probably wondering why is this here? This is a sub-3 issue, but because UC Davis has a marine mammal center, it's in the budget here, but it comes to us courtesy of sub-3, and I asked sub-3 to consider this allocation, and I think LAO has stated the issue fairly. There is an emergency in the state. The marine mammal centers, which normally are able to operate on budgets that are based on grants and donations, are overwhelmed by the thousands of additional strandings that have been happening up and down the coast of California that have only been exacerbated by the recent oil spill in Santa Barbara that has created some additional stranding problems. And so this money would go a long way to addressing budget shortfalls that the marine mammal centers up and down our coast are currently facing.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Ms. Bosler.
So our Department of Fish and Wildlife works routinely with these nonprofit organizations, as well as the National Oceanic Administration, the federal government, who is specifically a designated managing entity for marine mammals. We are monitoring the situation. It is not our understanding that additional monies are needed at this time, but we would continue to review other information that you may have on this issue going forward. But at this time, we don't support the augmentation.
All right. 35 is the CSU funding package.
Jason Constanturos, LAO. This is would increase CSU's main base appropriation. The governor proposed $157 million in May. Both houses voted to provide additional funding on top of that. In addition, both the Senate and the Assembly provided some earmarks for those augmentations. Both provided enrollment growth targets. You'll note that they're relatively similar. The Senate proposed 10,000 full-time equivalent students. The Assembly, 10,400 full-time equivalent students. In addition, they both provided earmarked funding for student support services. The Senate provided funding for $75,000 worth of student support services. The Assembly, 75 million. Keep seeing the thousands there, and I forget that it's already in thousands.
Yes.
And then 38 million on the Assembly side. In addition, the Senate also provided 50 million in the budget year for a new program that would provide grants to incentivize students to study as full-time students and graduate in 4 years. In terms of the dollars, we recommend going with the Assembly on this, simply because the Assembly fully met the budget request from the CSU trustees that they made back in the fall. The Senate provides funding above that, about $52 million. Because it's a funding above what the trustees proposed, it's unclear to us how they would use that spending. And we're glad to answer any questions after that.
Thank you, Mr. Constantouris. Ms. Bosler.
Yes, so our approach on the CSU was also to continue to provide the multi-year funding plan, the $119 million that was in the January budget. But then at the May revision, we added an additional $38 million, and this is for two different purposes. One, to expand enrollment beyond what the CSU had planned to do with the resources we provided them in January by an additional 1,500 students. That would be mainly transfer students that would come into the CSU for the spring semester. But then also CSU and the Board of Trustees is currently undergoing student success initiatives to really improve the outcomes and reduce the time it takes CSU students to get to degree, and to support those efforts that the chancellors are the Board of Trustees is well underway to design and implement the additional monies that we provide in the May revision would be split half and half, essentially, to increase enrollment, but also increase those student success activities that will ultimately allow and build more capacity for more enrollment by moving students through the system faster.
So whereas you have some money for enrollment growth, you've never been big on setting any sort of targets, though?
Our approach over the last few years is to work collaboratively with the universities on outcomes and on improving outcomes, and not to just merely hit enrollment targets, because it's one thing to enroll a student, but it's another thing to graduate that student in a timely manner. And so the focus has been more on the cost to degree, but also on just the effectiveness of getting students through bottleneck courses. The CSU, the community colleges, and the UC all suffer for some of these courses that are very oversubscribed and can sometimes delay students' progress by a semester or more, which matters. And so a lot of the focus with both segments, UC and CSU, has been on really trying to remove bottlenecks and look at other barriers that students have to successfully completing the degrees in a timely manner.
Just speaking philosophically, do outcomes and enrollment growth targets need to be mutually exclusive?
No, probably not. I think that we have the capacity. We have a system that has a capacity that it does. The additional monies that we provide them, there's always going to be trade-offs. Do you invest in changes to the system that may be one-time in nature but could have ongoing effects that are very beneficial to the student body over time? Or do you add additional students and just continue to do the work as you've always done it? So I think our focus for the last few years has really been on taking a little bit of a pause and really focusing on the university's performance and outcomes as opposed to just plowing ahead with the pressure, the additional enrollment. But all of the efforts that we've undertaken have all been on the eye of providing more access for students to our very fantastic higher education system.
Thank you. Assemblywoman?
Yes, I think I agree with my senator here, because I think it has to be a dual approach, especially when you're dealing with people in their lives. It has to be an effort to try to create outcome in terms of folks graduating. But if you're 18 years old, you're trying to get in college. And so to tell them to wait or delay because we're trying to work on this other project generally doesn't work very well. It's kind of like us telling us we're trying to increase our high school graduation. We have to work on the juniors and seniors as well as the kindergartners. You can't just write off the juniors and seniors and you can't write off the kindergartners. So you have to have more than just one way of looking at it. There are students now trying to get into the CSU and trying to get into our universities, and so they're not going to wait for us to figure out some other stuff. They need to get in at the same time. We need to be able to, as I say, walk and chew gum at the same time, which means we must be able to focus on outcomes that's there. The other thing we mentioned in the assembly piece, and that's critical, and we've earmarked $38 million for student success, and I've asked that we also define what student success is, because sometimes if you don't put that in the language, and I know that the organizations have some good issues about what student success is, not only if we're talking student success, having the right mentors, the right faculty, having those kinds of things in place. Otherwise, we leave it up to the institutions to figure out what student success is, and oftentimes it becomes what they think is important. Maybe it's hiring a scholar of scholars to be to do the most finite research on the face of the earth and bring recognition to the institution, and not necessarily to talk about faculty who can relate to students, helping students to come, to go to college, get to degree faster, mentors and so forth and so on. So they've given us a good list. I'm hoping that will fall into our trailer bill language, so that when we talk about basically helping $38 million for student success, that we define the student success in our trailer bill language and not leave it up to the individual campuses to figure out what they think success is that may not necessarily fit our goals and objectives.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. Colleagues, we are at the 6 o'clock hour. On the Senate side, we were going to start briefing for coming days at 6:15. Okay. This may be an appropriate time for us to break before we dive into CSU. So without objection.
Are we wrapping up this item on the CSU funding now?
Tonight?
No, right.
Like,
yes.
are we turning the corner?
Because we're talking about I'm sorry.
We've just completed page 35.
On the CSU stuff?
And then
CSU funding package?
Yeah,
right.
We have a lot more to go.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
just a comment
Go right ahead, of course.
That. Sorry, I apologize.
Senator Laura.
Just some overall thoughts as we talk about the CSU and between houses and the administration. I just want to give kudos to the CSU for playing by the rules and have, I think, been really good partners with the legislature, maybe to their own detriment, because it looks like they're getting the short end of the stick again in comparison to the UC. I've always been a critic of this committee of two. At least it should have been a committee of four, including our CSU and our community colleges, if we really want to talk about higher education in the state. And so I think, again, the CSU has answered with much less money. They have continued to graduate their four-year graduation rates are reaching an all-time high. And I think, again, we're asking the CSU to do less with much more, and they continue to be, I think, very honest partners with the legislature. And I think it behooves us to take that into consideration when it comes to negotiating an outcome of funding for the CSU.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, Senator Nielsen, of course.
I would like to echo that same sentiment in terms of how CSU has responded. And it doesn't preclude us working with UC to a higher degree, notwithstanding some of the tensions that have been heretofore. I think we can. But in both cases, I think it's incumbent on us to ensure that we accomplish in this budget at least a 2-year freeze on tuition at both levels.
I just want to be very complimentary of the CSU system and the initiatives that they have taken on to improve student success. And that is one of the reasons why in the May revision, we did dedicate $38 million in ongoing general fund resources, which is in contrast to the UC, where the $96 million is restricted, one time for 3 years payments of back debts. So this is really about strategic augmentation of ongoing resources, because they are absolutely the workhorse of our higher education system.
Duly noted, and we do appreciate that. And again, I'll correct you as I corrected our distinguished pro tem. The CSU is not only the workhorse of our system, they are also providing fabulous research and are growing into their own research-based institution. Again, the need for us to really look at the 3 segments of education in where the CSU continues to morph itself into a much more complex system that graduates the most BAs than any other system in the state, and that has programs that can rival not only the UC, but other universities across this country and internationally. So again, the need for us to rethink about these three segments and how they now are poised or not poised to meet the global workforce of the 7th largest economy in the world.
You know, we often talk about diversity on our conference committee. I think we need to be looking at diversity of segments. We're a little unbalanced here. So game plan then for tomorrow is we'll convene conference at 11:30, and we'll work until 2, at which time we'll break so we can all get to our floors and get a little work done. And before we break at 2, we'll announce exactly what time we'll come back, maybe 3:30, we'll see. So again, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you tomorrow. And one last announcement, there will be no reconciliation tonight because we took no actions. Thank you.